This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
Hey everybody, it's a Patreon episode. I'm Tom Ballard, that's Emerald Moon. Hey Emerald.
Hi, hello. I forgot we were recording, so I'm unprepared. Sorry, everyone.
And what were you doing? Were you out there organising the working class or preparing for the revolution or what?
I was eating some really yummy tacos and I just had a massage.
Fucking hell.
I was watching White Lotus, actually. I haven't watched it yet, and I'm finally on the bandwagon and giving it a crack.
Oh,
pretty
great.
good stuff.
Oh, like you're starting from the start?
First season, yeah.
Holy shit. Well, when you're working on the one lower house winning campaign in the federal election, life's pretty good.
Time to relax.
This is not an official Greens Party podcast or reflective of the bourgeois lifestyle of Green supporters. It is produced by Michael the Griffin, and we are continuing in our long-running series of reading Paddy Manning's book, Inside the Greens. We are finishing... No, we're not finishing, actually. We're not going to finish this. This is such a long chapter. We are continuing Chapter 9 into Power.
Part 2 of question mark.
I think we'll do it in 3. We'll do it right. But the third part deserves its own little thing. Pop quiz, what do you remember of Part 1 of Chapter 9? Emerald, go.
Well, since I just looked at the show plan, it says early Rudd years, Labor versus Greens nastiness.
Yeah, remember all that? That was good.
We're talking about Rudd.
Rudd sweeping to victory. He doesn't need the Greens. Fuck the Greens. Actually, I reread this and when I was preparing for Part 2, and I just think this takes on an extra level of resonance, I suppose, in a post-2025 election world.
Okay.
Labor was riding high and didn't believe it needed the Greens at all. The end of the Howard era was a relief for progressive voters, and it seemed Rudd's honeymoon with the electorate would never end, with the polls heading into uncharted territory. The fiscally conservative Rudd government hit the ground reviewing, however, and consulting, as with the elitist 2020 summit, to which no Greens were invited. A micromanaging Prime Minister got bogged down rather than embarking on a big picture Whitlamite wave of reform.
Prescient, perhaps?
Well, can you imagine such a thing happening with the second Albanese term?
I mean, Labor riding high and not believing it needs the Greens at all. Absolutely.
We are living that. We are living that right now.
That's the theme. Labor is, like, Albanese has just slayed the green dragon and is like, all right, time to reform slowly and maybe not even in the right direction. But we'll see. Those pesky Greens get in the way. Also, sorry, I've been meaning to ask why your description on our recording platform has said philanthropist for ages. It now says cool white guy. Is that something you've set for yourself? Or
that is deeply embarrassing. I'll put it back to
No, hey, I think you are a cool white guy.
Before this, I was recording a podcast called Not Your Token, which is focused on race issues. And I
it
was
now
the
says
token
ally
white guy. Yeah, I've changed it to ally.
Wow. Thanks, Tom.
No worries. I'm pretty cool, Fred. In part 1 of Chapter 9, we also talked about Peter Garrett and him coming into the ministry as a Labor member. Rachel Seward pointing out that Labor still left a lot of the work choices infrastructure in place. And again...
the GFC.
The great GFC happened
in
2008, the big old crash and the response and the Greens' role in that. And the juicy stuff was all the Green dramas. Andrew Wilkie quitting the party in Tasmania, Deb Foskey in the ACT. In WA, Greens MP Adele Carles having an affair with the Liberal Treasurer Troy Buswell. And we were like, oh my God, what the hell? And in Queensland, Ronan Lee defected from Labor to the Greens and was promptly voted out.
That's what you get. You go Green, you go... something.
Brilliant. So, part 2 of this chapter, of course, it's time, everybody. It's time to talk the CPRS.
Wow. Everyone, this entire podcast has been leading up to this moment. And if you are a Labor Rustodon who's been listening, waiting, when are they going to talk about it? When are they going to talk about it? When are they going to talk about it? The answer is now.
Right now. I mean, we've talked about it a lot already.
We have talked about it, yeah. We did a whole thing on it, didn't we?
I can't remember if we did a full episode. We've discussed it many times. We released a
Yeah.
little bit from my
We did a
book
bit of a
as
deep
a sort
dive.
of bonus that looked at the CPRS moment
Mm.
and the defense thereof and the actual history involved. But there are some juicier, and I actually relied on Paddy Manning's Inside the Greens as a source for that part of the book. So some of this might be kind of familiar territory, but there are a few still little quirks and little details in the story that are worth.
It's always
revisiting,
new traits to every time I go back and watch the CPRS again, I notice a new detail. It just sparks joy, right?
Yeah, it's like Goodfellas. You watch it every time.
Exactly. Yeah.
You notice.
That's what I've always said.
Question before we dive into this: Do you think CPRS is over now? Is half the new CPRS?
Yeah,
and the Greens
that's a
obstructionism
great question.
We all going to forget about that, or
Maybe.
what's the deal?
Yeah, because they only need one. They just need one they can point to, and you're better off referring to a more recent one. And also, because the CPRS is designed to be like, well, the Greens, they're meant to be good for the environment, but actually they're bad. And then the Greens became like evidently the best party in terms of housing affordability policy. And so you needed an argument to attack that. So now they can say, well, the Greens, their policies might look like they care more about affordable housing, but they're actually bad on housing. So maybe now they've just got two tools in their toolkit. When someone cares about the environment, it's CPRS, and someone cares. But it's not even about the policy, is it? Because it's just about the vibe of blocking. So yeah, CPRS is so 2009.
Oh my god, 90s kids will remember the CPRS.
This is the CPRS now. Feel old yet? It's the half.
All right, here we go. Paddy Manning writes, through 2009, the panic surrounding the GFC eased slowly, although the global political fallout was only beginning. The federal government drafted legislation for the Carbon Pollution Reduction Scheme, the CPRS, which, in the view of the Greens climate spokesperson, Christine Milne, had been progressively browned down, with $16 billion in free permits for trade-exposed industries, much of which would head offshore, and compensation for coal-fired power generators. Milne was not alone in her view. At a Senate inquiry, the author of the Climate Change Review, Ross Garnaut, himself expressed disappointment in the scheme's largesse to industry and said it was a line ball call whether it would be better to pass the emissions trading system as it stood or start again.
Interesting.
This is before they've even negotiated with the coalition, all right? So this is even before it's been browned or watered down even more.
This is just its original form.
It's coming in shit.
So the Greens sounds like something the Greens should absolutely just not pass if they care about climate change, right? So that's open and shut, I imagine.
Yeah, you're right. All right, thanks for supporting the show, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Labor's hostility towards the Greens was relentless. Penny Wong came to the view in early 2009 as the Australian's editor-at-large Paul Kelly wrote that the Greens wanted radical differentiation from Labor on climate and that Bob Brown had suffered from too much praise for too long. She was astounded that most of the media took the Greens at face value and suspended criticism when dealing with them.
Totally. I've always thought this.
Don't you hate it when you open the newspaper in the morning, you think, oh, so much positive coverage of the
pro-Greens content. I mean, this kind of thing does make, like, this isn't the first time I've heard this. Like, I think Labor in particular sometimes are like, oh, the Greens, they get such a good run. And like from our perspective, that's fucking insane. And like Labor often gets way too good. Their policies just get, I mean, we're talking about this in terms of the housing policies as they reported during the election, Labor and the Liberals' policies versus the Greens, and the amount of detail that the media requested from the Greens for them to give it any level of credibility. And yet they just report, they're like, yeah, Labor's going to build 1 million homes or something. I don't know. But yeah, like it kind of just goes to show how real, I hate the word tribalism, but you know, bias. Yes. I don't know. I think Penny Wong probably genuinely believes this because anytime she would see any coverage, probably even just neutral coverage of the Greens, for someone who hates the Greens, you're like, what the fuck? Why would they print this? So yeah, really genuinely.
Why are they allowed? They're not even supposed to be in Parliament. It's only supposed to be Labor or the coalition. They're cheating. Exactly. And it's like, we get a good run. Dude, we're barely happy to get a run. Like,
Yeah.
think of the way we're just completely omitted from political conversation so many times, or any proposal from the Greens is waved away going, well, it's coming for the Greens, so it's never going to happen.
But you're right. That's the way they think it should be.
Yes. True. Martin Ferguson thought Brown's aim was to demonise the coal industry in the same way he's sought to demonise the forest industry. Ferguson, a former
they're
ACT
bad. Like, you don't really need, you don't need to demonize them. They're just simply bad.
It's actually really easy, yeah. Ferguson, a former ACTU president, would fight the Greens all the way. So in June 2009, the bills that make up the CPRS, they're debated in the House. The coalition opposes them. They say that Australia should wait to see what the US does, recap and trade, and the Copenhagen Climate Conference is coming up that year. But gets through there, debate moves to the Senate, where Labor plus the Greens plus Nick Xenophon have 38 seats. And they obviously represent broadly a group of people who want to do something about climate change, whereas the coalition have got Steve Fielding, that's Family First, that's a total of 38 seats on their side.
So to clarify, the CPRS at this point, does it include a price on carbon? Like, what actually does it include in terms of reducing carbon emissions?
Carbon emissions. It is a collection of legislation that would make the make up what we call the scheme. That would put a floating price on carbon. Yes. But also involves a huge amount of compensation to the industry to transition to that scheme.
Right.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Brown flagged that the Greens would oppose the CPRS in its current form, as did Milne. They said it was piecemeal, it didn't take a whole of government approach, it still had all those big subsidies that we've talked about. During the debate, knowing the legislation would fail, Milne moved an amendment to stiffen up the emissions reductions targets ahead of Copenhagen, committing the government to entering the climate treaty negotiations at the end of 2009 with an unconditional commitment to reduce emissions by at least 25% below 1990 levels by 2020, and a willingness to reduce emissions by 40% below 1990 levels by 2020 in the context of a global treaty. These are, of course, in today's standards, extremely mild targets. I think at some point, I remember reading there was somewhere some was talking about a 90% reduction by 2050, of course. And everyone was like, that's insane and ridiculous. How could you possibly think that? And of course, today we're going net zero by
Keep in mind,
2050.
I don't know how much difference it makes, but most emissions reduction targets now are based on 2005 levels.
Yes. Whereas Kyoto, I believe, was all based around 1990 levels from memory.
Okay.
Yeah. Anticipating defeat, Penny Wong flagged that the government would bring the bills back to the Senate, and the package went down by 42 votes to 30, opposed by the coalition, the Greens, Xenophon, and Fielding. So the Labor government had lost round one as expected. The pressure on all sides was mounting, backed up by the threat, which Brown acknowledged, that if the legislation was defeated a second time, it would serve as a trigger for a double dissolution climate election, most probably in early 2010. Some, like the former Democrats leader Natasha Stott Despoja, commenting from the sidelines, thought that was exactly what the Greens wanted.
Cool. Maybe they just wanted good legislation. I don't know. But is the implication here that maybe, Bob Brown or the Greens thought this will work in our favour if we go to an election because Labor wouldn't pass strong climate laws?
Yes. I mean, you could say that, yes, the Greens have the capacity and we're prepared in this circumstance to say no, to hold out for something better, and we're prepared to go to an election based on that basis, because that's exactly what happened. It wasn't a double dissolution election, but they went to an election, in the wake of Rudd-Gillard becoming Prime Minister, of course, but that's exactly what they did. And as we'll find out in this chapter, not this is why they did that, but politically that turned out to be very good for them, because all of Australia is saying we're scared of climate change. 2009 is a Black Saturday bushfires, for God's sakes. Everyone's saying, let's fucking do something. And you, Kevin Rudd, have told us it's the greatest moral challenge of our generation, so we should really get cracking and we should do something and probably negotiate and work with the parliament that we have to get the best possible outcome.
No, fuck you. Fucking shut the fuck up. That's my Kevin Rudd. Was that good? How do you do his
These fucking language. Rat fuckers. They fucked us.
Yeah.
As yet, there was no great outcry about the Greens' position. They were pushing for tougher action in line with Garneau, climate science, and the environmental movement, and even sections of the business community, exactly as they had said they would do. Yet they'd been shut out of the negotiations. Malcolm Turnbull, leader of the opposition, said the coalition would propose amendments in the coming months. Pont Wong said the government would consider them and try to come to an agreement. But the ground was shifting beneath Turnbull, who was losing authority inside the Liberal Party, and loose cannons like Wilson Tuckey. Do you remember Wilson Tuckey? Does that ring a
No.
bell? Great name. He's fucking mental. Corey Bernardi, Julian McGauran, and Dennis Jensen were openly decrying the CPRS and climate science with full-throated support from the Nationals, particularly Barnaby Joyce. I feel like Barnaby Joyce's evil and climate-denying role in Australian politics is often discounted. We don't remember it
It's
enough.
forgotten because he's just a bumbling, not philanderer? What's it called? Adulterer.
He's a philanderer. Yeah.
He's a philanderer as well. Yeah, I guess.
As a concession to the Greens, the government split off its renewable energy target legislation, imposing a target of 20% renewables by 2020. This had the support of all sides, but had hitherto been packaged up with the CPRS, and it duly passed through the Senate almost without a murmur. It would prove the single most effective legislation response Australia made to climate change. Wow. So that's something that the Greens said, that's good legislation, we'll support that. No worries at all.
Yeah, we'll pass that. Yeah.
But we're very obstructionist. Under the Constitution, Labor had to wait 3 months to reintroduce its CPRS bills if it wanted a double dissolution trigger. In October, before the legislation passed the lower house, the Greens released 22 proposed amendments publicly, with emissions reduction targets of between 25% and 40%, all carbon permits auctioned, trade-exposed industries compensated only for the value of their lost competitiveness, not for their lost profits, and electricity generators receiving no compensation at all. They got nowhere. But an important inclusion there, thank you, Paddy, explaining once again that the Greens are saying, we want to pass this legislation. Here are some things to negotiate about. What do you think about these things?
Do you think, though, that people would say, 22 proposed amendments that drastically change the bill, you were being unreasonable, you didn't seriously expect Labor to just bend over and do whatever the Greens say? I mean...
I would expect them to, if they're interested in passing the legislation, if that's important to them, then yes, listening to these reasonable amendments to achieve that goal would be the best possible outcome. And actually, I was going to say this later on, but of course we get the classic perfect is the enemy of the good line. Now, I would argue that Labor's version of the perfect is them being able to completely ignore the Greens and to carry on pretending they're defenders of the climate while doing contradictory things like accepting donations from the fossil fuel industry and opening up new fossil fuel projects, right? We never focus on that side of the equation.
We're spinning perfect enemy of the good.
Yeah.
I see what you're doing. The good would be working with the Greens. Yeah,
Yes.
I guess, you're right. If you're on that side of things, why is it not framed that way? But there's the thing, because ultimately we know that the point is the Greens want the perfect legislation, the perfect policy, and you're admitting that Labor wants a less good thing. I mean, putting aside the fact that it's not good at all, generally it's often bad, and that's why the Greens won't pass it. But it's if it's perfect, do it. Anyway.
The next month, Milne released legal advice from Brian Walters SC that the CPRS locked in failure because if a government later sought to implement more progressive emissions reduction targets, the Commonwealth would be exposed to compensation claims, possibly in the order of billions of dollars. The CPRS classified emissions units as personal property, the advice explained. So if the government changed its value, it must be done on just terms.
Wait, so it assigned personal, almost like human rights to these energy generators, effectively.
Well, I'd say property rights, yes, or considered the emissions units to become.
But I mean,
property.
I say human rights because those rights are specifically meant to be assigned to humans as opposed to corporate entities.
Sure. Yes. Okay. Yes. Sure. The ownership over those emissions units, yes, is the same property. Now, the acquisition on just terms, again, if people have seen The Castle and Magna Carta, it's the vibe of the thing. But yes, that's the section in the Constitution that says, if you want to buy a house because you want to extend your airport or whatever, you need to give compensation on just terms to the people whose house you're buying. The government can't just steal your property under the Constitution.
Right. So I suppose that does regularly apply to corporate entities anyway. But still, seems like a bad way to set yourself up.
Well, particularly when it's also about your future emissions units that you would produce in the future to get compensation for not polluting more under a certain regime does seem bizarre and could be extremely expensive, particularly as they wanted to ramp up, the price in the future. In November, with bipartisan talks dragging, the Copenhagen summit fast approaching, the US cap and trade scheme bogged down in Congress, and China's position unclear, the CPRS bills came back. Neither the Greens nor the coalition saw the need to legislate before Copenhagen. What's more, the skeptics within coalition ranks were growing. Shadow Families Minister Tony Abbott, who had supported the ETS 3 months earlier on the basis that the coalition could hardly be browner than Howard, told a Liberal Party meeting in the country town of Beaufort that the idea the science of climate change was settled was absolute crap.
Good stuff.
Have you heard that quote before?
That the science of that it not being settled is absolute crap?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I feel like that's a quote associated with Tony Abbott that I've heard before, but I feel like it's remembered as him saying that the science itself is absolute crap, as opposed to the question of whether or not it's settled is absolute crap. And I know it's a slight difference.
That's true. I mean, I'm sure people like him would take real issue at that.
I wonder whether because he's off the chain, he's off the leash now, Tony. He says whatever the fuck he wants. He's doing his own podcast with the IPA. I wonder if he does. He's certainly anti-net zero, but whether he would actually say climate change is
some proper climate denialism. Very few of them do anymore. It's not cool anymore.
You look a little silly. Here's something that's definitely left out of the narrative and the retelling of the CPRS saga. Labor's focus on the politics of the situation. Okay, as summarised here by Paddy Manning. The CPRS debate was wedging the Liberals hard, and Labor was distracted by the possibility its opponents might split. Government business manager Anthony Albanese marvelled at a caucus meeting. We've now got the Libs on the canvas, and they are more internally split than any major political party since the Great Labor Split of the 1950s.
Cool.
Turnbull's resources spokesperson, Ian McFarlane, tried valiantly to come up with a scheme acceptable to his colleagues and the government. An exasperated Wong fronted the Deputy Prime Minister, Gillard. I'd like to know if I'm supposed to be negotiating this deal or crashing this deal? Gillard confessed, well, Penny, I don't bloody know. Just a real bunch of brain geniuses working on this, it seems. Wong feared a repeat of the Republican referendum debate a decade earlier when reform failed due to opposition on left and right for entirely different reasons. She was dead right. For Milne, Labor chose hardball politics rather than the best path to an outcome for the planet. They had the choice. They could have held it over post-Copenhagen. Instead of that, they decided to wedge the Liberals. But if Labor was indeed hoping to split the Liberals, they failed. Instead, the day before the final vote, Abbott rolled Turnbull and took over the leadership. With the Liberal Party in shock, only 2 senators, moderate backbenchers Judy Troth and Sue Boyce, crossed the floor to support the scheme. With the Greens, Xenophon and Fielding opposed, it still went down solidly 41-33. Cynics wondered whether Troth and Boyce would have shown quite the same courage if they thought their votes might have clinched it. Labor's strategy failed completely, says Milne. They fell flat on their face.
That's interesting. I actually didn't realise the timing of this in relation to the Liberal leadership.
Yes, I mean, this was the issue, right, that Abbott used to make his move. And I think
I fully didn't know that.
Yeah, along with people like Nick Minchin and stuff. This was who was Nick Minchin, who was like full-on climate denier, who was, again, power broker in the Liberals. Yeah, they were the ones who were like, let's go for it, Tony, because, of course, Malcolm Turnbull is the lovey who loves renewable energy and loves nothing more than talking about climate action. But I think what's maybe not touched on here, and I think I might have got out of Whitlam's Children, the book by Sean Crow here, which I also read for the book, is that, so they go back to negotiate this particular legislation that's watered down. In order to try and get Liberal support under Malcolm Turnbull, they make more concessions. Okay, so they make this already bad bill even worse, bring it back into the Parliament. Liberals change leader, Tony Abbott votes it down, and Labor gets angry at Greens for voting no to a version of a bill a worse version of a bill they'd already rejected.
How did they? So, what amendments had they made at this point?
So there was even more to get the
More
Liberal
concessions,
support
more
was again more
subsidies.
payouts, yes, and
Yeah.
a longer time frame, and just worse, just problems with the bill.
Okay.
But worse to make it friendlier to the fossil fuel industry and mining corporations.
Still wasn't good enough for them. Okay.
Nope, wasn't good enough for Tony, I guess, because it was doing anything about climate change, and he said we shouldn't be having that.
Yeah.
So after that happens, that big old vote, there are 2 by-elections, which saw massive swings to the Greens in Higgins and Bradfield. Those are both Liberal seats at this time, and there are by-elections the Greens run and do very well indeed. And that's the Liberal base sort of sending a message saying, we actually quite liked Malcolm Turnbull, thank you, and he represents us, at least in these particular seats, more than freaky Tony Abbott does. Rudd goes to Copenhagen. Copenhagen doesn't go well. The consensus around climate change seems to be falling apart. Rudd comes home and he's angry. Again, we've been rat fucked by the Chinese, I believe is the quote from charming Mr. Rudd. After Christmas, the Greens worked hard to come up with a compromise that Labor might be able to live with, taking an idea from Garneau that a fixed price at the outset could transition into a floating price down the track. The Greens got the backing of peak environmental NGOs and announced the new proposal in February 2010 outside Parliament House. Brown and Milne invited Penny Wong down to Hobart. At their meeting, says Milne, Wong took one look and said, I'm not even going to show this to the Prime Minister. We couldn't have known at that point that the Gang of Four, that's Rudd plus Gillard, Wayne Swan and Lindsay Tanner, had already decided to dump the carbon price and go with the mining tax. Again, just incredible negotiations, and Labor just trying their absolute best to get this through. Wow.
So, is Wong cognizant of that decision as well? And that's why she's saying, I'm not even going to bother?
Yeah, I guess so. We couldn't have known. Yeah, so Penny Wong wasn't in the Gang of Four.
She's not in the gang.
But surely she's been briefed in
But
that,
she's probably, she's just realised thus far in being responsible for this cursed piece of legislation that's not going to work, I guess. I don't know.
Fuck is all. I want to be in foreign affairs. Leave me alone. For Milne, looking back, there is no other possible explanation. The government had reintroduced the CPRS legislation as amended by the coalition under Turnbull's leadership to the House of Representatives for a 3rd time. Turnbull crossed the floor to vote for it. At the end of April, the Sydney Morning Herald's Lenore Taylor wrote a bombshell story. The government planned to defer the scheme for 3 years. Rudd's memoir, published many years later, attributed that leak to a staffer in Gillard's office and claimed it was designed to kill off the scheme altogether, as the Deputy Prime Minister had urged.
So it's just maybe to clarify, it sounds as though actually the second time when we were just discussing, right after the coalition leadership's change, the second time legislation was introduced maybe wasn't with those Liberal amendments or coalition amendments. That must have been this 3rd time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I apologise. Yes, sorry, it must have been that 3rd time. Yes. So it passes in the lower house, Turnbull crosses in the House of Representatives, and it then goes to the Senate for the 3rd time and is then voted down.
But once again, Labor is apparently more willing to negotiate with the coalition, the literal climate deniers, than the Greens. Wong goes, oh no, I'm not even going to bother showing Greens proposals that have the backing of all the environmental NGOs and the science and so on and so forth. Yep. I'm not even going to show that to the Prime Minister, who has at the same time been totally willing to bend over backwards for the coalition.
Because again, the worst thing than the planet being cooked is showing that the Greens have any kind of power, or showing there's any point to voting Green, or there's any room to our left as a political party. And even though Labor plus the Greens equals a majority of Australians, or a majority of the Parliament overwhelmingly, no, we got to try and get bipartisan support from those psychos on the other side of the House who don't even really believe
Yeah.
But it was that decision to delay, like that story coming out, that really is the death knell here, as Manning writes. In the public mind, it was untenable for Rudd, who had described climate change in 2007 as the great moral challenge of our generation, to suddenly walk away. His popular support in all three major opinion polls dropped suddenly and did not stop falling. And actually, I'm going to jump over. There's a quote here from Peter Harcher saying that, like, you know, if he doesn't believe in this, then what does he stand for? And it was as consequential as John Howard's work choices, and you know the Greens' support went up to 15%. Like that was kind of the moment. But Mark Butler, in his book Climate Wars, there's an extract of this in the Guardian. I thought this was really interesting. The drift that he's talking about, the Labor government's policy on climate drifting at the start of 2010. The drift ended when a decision by the government's leadership to put the carbon pollution reduction scheme on ice was leaked to journalist Lenore Taylor. The community reacted strongly. Labor lost the support of around 1 million voters in just a fortnight. One voter told me in my electorate of Port Adelaide, I was never really sold on the whole climate issue, but was willing to back you in anyway. But when you just suddenly dropped the thing because things got too hard, you lost me. I thought you were all piss weak.
Yeah.
Seems important. But again, and look, in this Mark Butler, extract in this book, I haven't read the book Climate Wars, but he he has a level of self-reflection. And when he talks about what's happened with the climate wars, he actually identifies Labor's role in it, like Labor's failings in that particular political fight, where most of the blame should lay, seeing as they were in fucking government and they were the majority of it. And the Greens, as we all know, wanted better climate outcomes. Like everybody knows that across the board.
I mean, this does seem to have a lot of parallels with the EPA as well, like the nature positive laws and the negotiations, and even the fact that, you've got a minister who is like desperately struggling to fucking negotiate something, dealing with the coalition as well as the Greens, and a prime minister that appears more willing to deal with the coalition than the Greens. You could have got something with the Greens, but then the call is made to just scrap it completely. And I don't really know, maybe because people just really weren't buying it. But I know Labor at least tried. They were running it pretty hard, at least in Brisbane, in this most recent election, to do the same thing, where they said that the Greens led to the EPA being like they blocked an EPA from happening. And they were like running ads or do like flyers and stuff on that theme. Exactly the same scenario.
Well, I looked up when was the last time CPRS was kind of mentioned, and the quote I pulled up was in our show notes, was Tanya Plibersek talking about the EPA, saying if the Greens don't vote for us, it's really going to be CPRS 2.0.
Yeah, that's like what some strategists clearly in the Labor Party were thinking.
Jesus. In a news poll at the end of May, the Greens hit an all-time national peak with primary support at 16%, the highest vote any third party had ever achieved. 16%. 16%.
Sounds nice. Can we have that?
Rudd was suddenly vulnerable. Much of the blame for the failure of the Parliament to legislate action on climate change, however, would fall on the Greens. Womp womp. The most stinging critique, although it was not explicitly directed at the Greens, stemmed from a warning made by Garneau himself in a public lecture at ANU just before the second vote on the CPRS, that there was a danger that the best has become the enemy of the good and the friend of the bad. After the CPRS went down, this theme would be prosecuted with particular vigour by many in Labor, from government business managers Albanese to former New South Wales Premier Bob Carr. It was elaborate face-saving. Over the years, the idea has been taken up with increasing vehemence, acquiring a ring of truth it does not deserve. In 2016, former Assistant Climate Change Minister Greg Combet even blamed the Greens' decision on the CPRS for Labor's leadership coup. Combet writes, it was a major call and it was a major fuck-up. How stupid. They've put action on climate change in Australia back many, many years. They could have voted for it then, and I think Kevin Rudd would probably still be Prime Minister. And the carbon price would have been in place for 7 years by now. And the world would have kept going, but our emissions would be going down. That was an unforgivable act of bastardry. There's no two ways about that.
Like the picture of the rainbow world, beautiful world, if the Greens had just passed the CPRS. This is what it could have been like.
God, can anyone take responsibility for anything, for fuck's sake? It's the Greens' fault that Julia Gillard knifed Kevin Rudd?
Yeah.
Ugh.
Why would the Greens do this? Stab.
I'm sure that's what Rudd said when he got the call. He said,
Yeah, why would
Bob Brown! Why have
God
you done
damn
this
you,
to
Bob. Before we move on, just quickly, how did you say? You said vehemence?
me? Yeah.
I would say
How do you say it?
vehemence.
Vehemence. Yeah, I think either is acceptable.
Vehemently? Vehemently?
I think either's fine.
Right
You're
in,
probably
listeners.
right. Vehemence is probably best, yeah.
I don't know.
I've just noticed that Paddy Manning spelt Labour with a U here, weirdly. Anyway. Brown, Milne, and the rest of the party were unrepentant and have remained so, notwithstanding the debilitating climate wars of the decade that followed. The party's position was vindicated at the time, at least according to the two leaders, by a spectacular showing in the Tasmanian election of March 2010. The Greens won 22% of the statewide vote in the House Assembly, getting up a candidate in all 5 seats for the first time since 1989. As in that year, the party now held the balance of power. That is a pretty stunning result across Tasmania. That's when Nick McKim, who was the leader of the party at the time, he's in the ministry. They end up being in coalition with Labor. He has the portfolios of education, public transport, and corrections. Cassie O'Connor, who was his partner at the time. Do we know that Nick McKim and Cassie used to smooch? She had human services, Aboriginal affairs, and climate change, and they were responsible for half the state's budget.
Wow.
There you go.
That's wild. 22% is huge statewide.
Big stuff. You would
Impressive.
sort of think that would be some kind of, I mean, no shade on Tassie. We love Tassie, of course, but they're not always the greatest indicator of everything that's happening in Australian politics. But at least if everyone hated the Greens, you wouldn't be getting 22%.
Yeah, you'd think.
So Rudd walks away from that and he focuses on fucking up something else, the resources super profits tax, as recommended by Ken Henry. That's not fair. I think that the tax was good, but probably should have foreseen the massive campaign that came against it, courtesy of the mining industry. Then polls continue to go down. Gillard eventually makes a move in June 2010. Stab, stab, stab. This is from Bob Brown. I didn't want to do this. Blame the Greens.
Yep.
She takes over. They water down the mining tax significantly, and it's then passed by the Greens. And I did think this was interesting. Interestingly, in a sign that the pain of the CPRS debate was lingering, the Greens passed Gillard's new minerals resource rent tax despite some misgivings. The Greens were all for a mining tax and a sovereign wealth fund to reinvest the fruits of the commodities boom for the long term. But it was clear the MRRT would achieve none of that. That South Australian Senator Penny Wright described it as a wasted opportunity. But as Senator Scott Ludlam conceded years later, it was a choice between a piss-weak mining tax or nothing at all.
Yeah.
And I suppose they would argue that, yes, the CPRS was not. The CPRS would have actually made things worse. It would have locked in failure. It would have been held up as like, this is our level of climate action. And so holding out for more was totally justified, whereas the mining tax, it really was this or zilch.
So when do we get to the, so-called world-leading climate legislation that the Greens negotiated with the Gillard government? Because that's always the narrative that's kind of put forth from the Greens now is, we opposed the CPRS and then we got something way better with Gillard.
Well, that is after the 2010 election when Labor is forced into minority and they have to form a little agreement with my friend and yours, Bob Brown, and the Greens.
They get in bed together. Because he's a man and she's a woman.
Even though he's gay and she's
even though
dating
he's
a gay hairdresser.
Also. Yeah, and she doesn't even have children. Wow.
Yuck. Rushing straight to an election, Gillard not only eschewed support for an ETS, she also promised there would be no carbon tax under the government I lead. Instead, she announced an execrable policy, a citizens' assembly, to debate climate change, which was lampooned on all sides and sank without trace.
Citizens' Assembly. The most cringe guy cornering you at a party being like, I feel like we really need to move towards citizens' assemblies.
Also, have you checked out my crypto? It's really good. Crypto and citizens' assemblies.
Execrable? I've never seen this word before. I'm going to just admit that. We're doing lots of word questioning today, but
I think
I also thought it was eschewed, not eschewed. So I'm learning a lot. This is reading with Tom and Emerald.
Jesus Christ. Milne recalls that the Greens went into the 2010 election as the only party still with a very strong commitment on global warming. There was fresh wind in the party sails too. Behind-the-scenes rich lister Graham Wood, founder of accommodation website What If, had approached
Corporate
Bob Brown
donor.
out of the blue, yes, in May about donating to the party. Genuinely worried about the future of the planet and aghast at the failure of the country's politicians to tackle climate change, Wood had been the principal funder of a new group, the Melbourne-based Beyond Zero Emissions, which was determined to focus on solutions commensurate with the climate emergency. The emergency was laid out in stark terms in a book called Climate Code Red by Philip Sutton and David Spratt. Have you ever heard of that?
Nope.
I feel like there were a lot of books around the time.
There have been too many climate books now. Yeah, maybe this was one of the first.
Over dinner with Bob Brown and Ben Oquist in Canberra, Wood said the Greens needed to run a professional advertising campaign this time around, and he wanted to help fund it. Wood expected to be one of a handful of wealthy business people prepared to put their money into the cause. He rang around, but struck wariness about donating publicly to the Greens.
They're like, oh, Graham. Look,
who is
I
this?
cannot wait to see you for drinks on Sunday, however.
I'm going through a tunnel. My private jet's going through a tunnel. The Gillard coup had changed everything, forcing Wood's hand. He bore the whole cost himself, forking out $1.6 million in what was then the largest individual political donation Australia had seen. It would be topped in 2016 by Malcolm Turnbull's $2 million donation. Remember when he donated?
Yeah, to himself.
To the Liberal Party. As he
truly
sought
one of the most
re-election.
embarrassing Australian politics
Awful.
moments ever. Love remembering that.
Extraordinary stuff.
Yeah.
Asked at the time what Wood had sought in return for his donation, Bob Brown said, "There's nothing Graham could possibly gain personally out of this, and certainly none's been discussed. Not ever has Graham said, 'Oh, I'd like you to do such and such.' Not ever." I don't know if we talked about Graham Wood that much. We've talked about Duncan Turpie.
Yeah.
But what do we think about Graham Wood?
Well, I guess, yeah, because Graham Wood was just this, it was a bit of an anomaly, right? It was like this election, huge donation. I don't know how much or whatever if he continued to donate after this, whereas Duncan Turpie is like a current donor, as I understand
Turpie's
it.
still going. Wood still
and
gave
massive.
a fair bit. I believe he gave about $500,000 to the Victorian Greens in 2016. It was still chipping in a fair bit of cash.
Yeah.
But
right.
Actually, we'll find out in a moment. The donations have gone down a bit.
It's
This
a good
donation
question.
was kept secret, which I think is a bit crazy.
Yeah.
Like the New South Wales branch had no idea that this donation had been made.
That's surely just a recipe for disaster, because like when the members don't know, then when they find out, they're going to be like, what the fuck? And have no kind of response, no understanding for it, and probably believe whatever terrible narrative is actually, is placed upon it by our opponents. Like, I get that. Yeah, it's funny though, because this is another one. It's like Duncan Turpie, if anyone is listening and on the Patreon and doesn't know this, Duncan Turpie is a professional poker player, a reclusive mathematician who donates a lot of money to the Greens, and particularly the Queensland Greens. He's a big backer of them. And like Labor and sometimes Liberals and the Australian and whatnot will run this as a gambling lobby donation, which is it's kind of literally like the opposite. But the Graham Wood thing, I mean, they will also use that then as evidence that, the Greens do take corporate donations, quote unquote corporate donations, just like because he is the CEO of a company. And I'm like, it's not quite true. It does illustrate that like there are issues with just banning corporate donations, because obviously, when you're dealing with this person that they have an interest in this particular for-profit enterprise, and they could ask for something, and it would probably be difficult it would create difficult circumstances. I mean, it's all very well, it's easy to be like, but no, he wouldn't ask for anything and we wouldn't do anything, but like it does happen. And you would then be like, ooh.
That's the implication, yes. Okay, Bob, what if he did do that? What if he did say, hey, do such and such? Which I wouldn't, again, based on Graham Wood's more recent comments, wouldn't be too surprising to me. But anyway, quite odd. But that aside, having $1.6 million was really handy and allowed the Greens to approach Cyclone Advertising, whose managing director, Rod Fuller, had worked on the Democrats' Keep the Bastards Honest campaign. And they ran a big campaign targeting balance of power in the Senate. The key message this time on voting Greens in the Senate came straight from focus group research with former Labor voters, according to Fuller. So big step up for the Greens, but we're still being outspent by the majors by a factor of 10 to 1.
Yeah, I wonder if that's where you get those. I don't know if you still see them around. I still see like vote Greens in the Senate as a particular bumper sticker that hangs around, probably from this campaign, I would say.
And I think in the last election shows there are still clearly people who split their ticket, right? They do vote Labor in the lower and then vote Greens in the Senate. Graham Wood's gone off us a little bit. In December 2021, in an interview with the Sun Herald of the Sunday Age, Mr. Wood said the Greens needed a shot in the arm because its support had not increased since 2010. The party's vote is still hovering around 10%. They don't seem to be cutting through. They could double their vote if they had someone out front really telling the world what they do. Someone like Sarah Hanson-Young is clever, young, and female with opinions. She should be handed the megaphone a bit more often.
Wow, Mr. Wood, ally, feminist. Mr. Wood's like, I think it should be a woman. That's right. I said it.
You know those women in politics with no opinions? Don't use one of those.
Yeah, she's a female with opinions.
And I'm okay with that. I actually want to hear more from her.
I'm not threatened, actually.
What if a woman was speaking? Then in the 2022 election, apparently he's totally out from the Greens. He made a small donation of $20,000 to the local party, which I think was...
What's that?
I think it was Tammy Tyrrell's party, at least. Or it was in Tasmania anyway. It was Anna, that lady Anna, who was the chief of staff to Jackie, I believe. Anyway.
Right.
Oh, that was the local network, also known as the Local Party of Australia. Yeah. It was founded in 2021 in Tasmania, trying to get Anna Bateman elected, which did not work out well. Or Leanne Minshall, I think, elected. Anyway. And he gave nothing to anybody else. So he's done with the Greens. Now, the question is, we've got Larissa Waters as our leader. She is a clever, relatively young woman, female with opinions.
With opinions. Graham, we're gonna double our vote. All she has to do is stand in front and really tell the world what the Greens do. So presumably Graham's going to be totally on board, right? He's going to love Larissa talking about banning corporate donations and taxing billionaires and big corporations to fund housing and climate action. Do you think he'll jump on board?
So interesting there, isn't it? Yeah, because it's like, okay, if after 2022, I don't know what he donated in 2025. Probably nothing. We can assume probably nothing, right? But it's like if after 2022, you're like not on board the Greens, even as they've expanded their seats and their vote, and yes, got a little bit more radical. If that's the where you're like, oh, they're increasing their vote, but not in the way I'd like it.
Yeah.
No more money for you.
Particularly like 2022. I mean, even if your thing is just like climate and environment, like 2022, bit of a climate election. Yeah. I don't know. Okay.
Julia Gillard's coup delivered her a poll bounce at first, knocking support for the Greens back down, which prompted Brown to say a big Green vote was temporarily parked with the country's first female Prime Minister. He was right. The bounce didn't last, and the Greens' poll performances recovered to around 13%. Labor's election campaign was marred by a wooden performance from Gillard. Sorry, that's just true. The real Julia. And by sabotage from Rudd. Also true. But again, the Greens are terrible at politics. Labor is literally blowing themselves up left, right, and centre, but Greens bad.
Literally. They're literally blowing themselves up left, right, and centre. No one's reporting on it.
The Greens and Labor did a comprehensive preference deal. The Greens supported Labor in 54 marginal lower house seats, while Labor's preferences went to the Greens in the Senate in all states and territories. There were no policy trade-offs. Nevertheless, Brown urged voters to ignore all the party's recommended tickets and to vote for themselves. Brutal. And called again for above-the-line voting and the abolition of preference deals along the lines of the upper house reforms enacted in New South Wales.
That's right. So we still had group voting tickets in the Senate.
Yes. Yeah, that wouldn't get kicked out till 2017 or something. At the branch level, many Greens were unhappy at the top-down deal. Gillard declared early on that she could work with the Greens if they had the balance of power, and that in the lead up to the campaign, Brown had sent her a 5-point climate action plan, including a carbon tax of $23 a tonne. Labor briefed journalists that the Greens were kidding themselves. Brown had also called for the return home of Australian troops in Afghanistan after a string of casualties and alleged war crimes at this point, and flagged that his party would try to increase the mining tax in the next parliament. All awful, terrible things, of course. I think we can all agree.
Evil, unreasonable, yeah.
Quelling speculation that he would not see out his parliamentary term, Brown said he had no plans to retire. I have never not only been happier, but felt more on top of and confident about this political life. I'm very well aware that people can overstay their time. If in 10, 20, 30 years down the track, someone taps me on the shoulder, I'll listen.
He's like, tell me when it's time to leave, otherwise I'm staying, baby.
30 years. He's currently 66 at this point, okay? So
Wow.
he's like, sure, if I'm 96 and someone taps me on the shoulder, then maybe I'll bow
Then
out.
I'll leave. Do we know how old? I'm sure we don't, but like oldest MP to serve in Australian Parliament
Ever
yet?
or now?
Ever. Not
Philip
necessarily
Ruddock
right now.
Must have been certainly pushing it. He was the father of the House for a very long time, the oldest member for quite a while.
House daddy.
Yeah. He's currently 82 and he fucked off in
Right.
2016.
Oh. So
early
that's 9
70s.
years ago. So he was only 73. That's not that old. Yeah.
I don't know if he's
Okay.
the oldest ever, but yeah. Okay, all the polls showed the Greens were on track for the balance of power, and in the final days of the campaign, Brown was giving a prime speaking slot at the National Press Club. He outlined a heavy redistributive platform, which the Sydney Morning Herald's Peter Harcher described as not just red inside like a watermelon, but red all the way through like a tomato.
Clever.
There's a little bit of green on a tomato. There's the leaf, the line.
There is
Anyway.
the leaf. Yeah, well, maybe that was the point. It's got a little green flourish on top.
A fig leaf to hide their communism underneath.
Commie.
Here's the insane, radical, revolutionary, Bolshevik plan that Bob Brown was presenting. High-speed rail, Denticare, marriage equality, abolishing ATM fees.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
Reviewing our defense treaty with the US. Imagine such a thing. A National Integrity Commission, taxing rich people and corporations and trusts, a death tax on estates worth more than $5 million.
This is the sound of soldiers, the Red Army marching. We need a Red Army choir songs in the background there.
Thank you, Comrade Bob.
Really, really crazy stuff. And, you know, it's confusing as well because I thought when Bob Brown was leading the party, it was just all about the environment and everyone thought he was really sensible.
Yes.
And everyone was quite happy with him, and particularly the media were happy with him and thought he was very middle of the road. And it's only after Bob Brown left that things got crazy and we need to go back to Bob Brown.
Yeah.
So maybe
Interesting.
is this the wrong? No?
Yeah, the party was radicalized under Richard D. Natale, the renowned revolutionary socialist. So that's when shit got crazy.
Anarcho-communist Richard D. Natale.
Speaking of, Lee Rhiannon says she's going to run for pre-selection for the New South Wales Senate. Bob Brown and Ben Elquist fly to Sydney to try to convince her not to run. Kate Fairman ran against Rhiannon. Fairman? Yes. Ran against Rhiannon, and Bob Brown supported her. He was calling for generational change, which I'm sorry, Bob, that's a bit fucking rich, mate.
Mate, come on. He's like, we need young women, and when one of those young women gets in, then they can come up and tap me on the shoulder. But I will not be taking any taps on the shoulder from Ms. Lee Rhiannon. I didn't realise also that it was so late that Lee Rhiannon ran for Senate. There you go.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I think she only did, term and a half then, I guess, because she finished up, she stepped down and handed over to Marine. she was re-elected in 2016. So yes, I think late 2018.
Yeah, right.
Kate Fairman met with John Kay, who was Rhiannon's friend, who said suggested that she shouldn't run against Lee, like just wait it out. She announced that she would, and Kay told her, "Right, this is war."
Cool.
Lee Rhiannon won pre-selection easily, and Fairman says the contest was the beginning of everything. Now that's a bit of foreshadowing.
The beginning of that's ominous. Wow. Beginning of everything.
Yeah. All right, a bunch of red baiting around Lee Rhiannon. We can probably skip over this. If you're interested in hearing more from Lee Rhiannon, you can listen to my conversation with her back on Patreon episode 27 when we talked about the state of the left.
We love Lee.
We love Lee. But hey, the result, come election day, 21st of August 2010, was a historic election result for the party and one that remains its high watermark. This, of course, is written in 2018, 2022, and 2025, both higher than this particular result. In both houses of parliament, the Greens secured the highest ever vote for a third party, topping the Democrats' best result in 1990 and that of the DLP decades earlier. For the first time in Australian history, a third party won a Senate seat in each state, taking the Greens' total representation to 9 senators, giving the party the sole balance of power in the upper house. The national vote was 13%, up 4%, and Christine Milne, that is higher than what we got in 2025. There you go.
Yeah.
And Christine Milne in Tasmania and Richard Italy in Victoria achieved quotas in their own right, polling first preference votes of 19.7% and 14.5%, respectively. Rachel Seward was easily re-elected in Western Australia, Penny Wright was successful in South Australia, and the party won its first Queensland Senate seat for Larissa Waters on 12.6%.
A little known lady by the name of Larissa Waters.
Whatever happened to her? It had taken 25 years to break through in Queensland, the toughest state for the party since Drew Hutton founded the Brisbane Greens in 1985. Waters, a solicitor for the state's Environment Defenders Office on the front line of the anti-fossil fuels lawfare, had succeeded at her second attempt. Seasoned environmental activist Sam LaRocca, who had run Waters' campaign, encountered a branch that not only expected defeat, but rejected the idea of planning to win. Shots fired.
Interesting, yeah.
I mean, I've heard Kitty, she's the state director of Queensland. Is that her official title?
Yeah, Kitty.
Yes, I've heard her in presentations before talk about that. Yeah, when she was entering the party, before the revolution, before the re-energizing of the Queensland Greens, yes, there was a general vibe of pessimism in the state. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's true. It is harsh, but probably true from what I understand. The thing of like not planning to win, it kind of not being about winning, and this idea. There are still some people in the party who are like, it's not about winning. And like, if there's one thing I would say a lot of things about Kitty, good things. But one thing about Kitty is she is about winning.
Yes.
And yeah, that's what she says. I can hear her saying it right now. She's like, how are we going to win? We're going to win. We've got to win. We can win. Winning, and planning to win.
Yes. And I feel like if your position is it's not about winning, I suggest you try winning. Try 2022
try winning and see how it feels. I mean, if you're going to do electoralism, electoral politics is fundamentally flawed in many ways. But like, if you're doing that, it's about winning. You know what I mean? You should try to win. I should maybe, I don't know, a caveat on that. Like, yes, it's not all that you can get things even if you don't win the seats, but like the project you are doing, you should be aiming to win.
Yes, that's true. All right, look, because we're going to do a third part to round out this chapter, I reckon we should probably call it there because we are about to get into, Adam Banse elected in this election, then we go into the minority government and we can talk about that particular agreement between Labor and the Greens and what was part of that deal.
Most productive government, most productive parliament in Australian history.
You said it. Yes, some fascinating quotes from Julia Gillard coming up, some interesting leadership tensions in the wake of the 2010 election in the Greens, which I think is also very interesting. And I guess, yes, as we finish out this chapter, we'll be looking at Bob Brown announcing his retirement and, yes, the Gillard minority government term and when it all went to shit between Labor and the Greens, particularly at the end of from 2012 onwards, I believe.
Relationship breakdown. It's always sad.
It's tough. Thanks so much for supporting our show and being a patron. We love you. And particularly if you have recently signed up, I think quite a few people in the wake of the 2025 election have been like, oh, fuck this. I need more content. I need more podcasting about the Greens to help us.
I need to understand what's going on. Well, yeah, if you are listening to, like, if you've just stumbled into this and you're like, what is this book? It's worth going back and listening. Like, I have definitely found it instructive listening to Inside the Greens and reading Inside the Greens to see how there are no original experiences and we can learn. We can learn a lot from history. Who would have thunk it? It's comforting in a way. So I recommend that. Or you just read the book.
Particularly, yeah, if you're feeling down about 2025, it's like, take some time, look at our history, seen how further away we've been from power in the past, how low and how tough it's been for the party before.
We're not at 2013 yet.
Things could always be worse. That's my motto. That's what I'm learning from Inside the Greens. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Serious danger to Australia.